Hi friends, welcome to my YouTube channel SS Analysis. First of all, I would like to tell you that if you are watching this video first time, subscribe my channel to see my more upcoming videos on analysis of different commodities and equity indices. And second important thing is to watch this video till its end to understand this thoroughly to take your decision. Your one like will motivate me to be regular in working more hard for you. Let us start the day to analyze the movements of S&P 500 futures in different time frames. So here you can see a weekly chart of S&P 500 futures. Here we can see that since the beginning of tariff trade war in September 2018, we witnessed a sharp fall in S&P 500 futures from the levels of 2951. Here you can see a sharp downward move when the S&P 500 futures touched the lows of 2315 on December 24, 2018, and since then we have seen a sharp recovery in the S&P 500 futures when the S&P 500 futures started this uptrend, which continued till February 10, 2020, when the S&P 500 futures touched the highs of 3391, where you can see that the S&P 500 futures found stiff resistance at the levels of 3391. Here we can see that whenever the S&P 500 futures entered in this overbought zone, sellers come forward and S&P 500 futures started to see sharp sell-off from these levels. And here you can see that after facing stiff resistance from the levels of 3383, the S&P 500 futures started to take a sharp downward move from February 17, 2020. Here friends, I would like to tell you that this is a weekly chart. So here one candle represents the movements of 1 week. So here you can see that the S&P 500 futures formed a gap down here during the week of February 24, 2020. Since then, you can see that the S&P 500 futures showed a sharp downward move which continued during this week, and the S&P 500 futures touched the lows of 2851 finally on last Friday. But amid growing hopes of Fed rate cuts and the Central Bank of Japan, both the central banks have announced a major cut which resulted in sharp bounce back in the S&P 500 futures on March 3rd, 2020. Here you can see the S&P 500 futures have taken a reversal, but I find that the S&P 500 futures will have to sustain above the levels of 3100. Most of the equity indices showed a good bouncing move of more than 4% on March 3rd. But here I find that the S&P 500 futures have come at a decisive juncture, because here I find that a stiff resistance is there at the levels of 3089, where I find that only a sustainable move above the levels of 3108 can only result in continuation of this upward move. But here I find if the S&P 500 futures sustain above the levels of 3028, then only we can expect the S&P 500 futures to maintain this uptrend while the infection continues to mount worldwide and COVID-19 cases in China continue to slow, which have given investors new hopes that disruption to supply chain in the country will resolve sooner. So therefore this bounce back can be seen in global equity markets. But I find that the statement of the WHO Director General, who said that China has reported 206 new COVID cases on Sunday, which is the lowest number of new cases since January 22nd. But still I find that the growing strength of gold futures looks evident enough to show the growing uncertainty in global equity markets, which may keep this bounce back in a limit, where I find that the S&P 500 futures have to sustain above the levels of 2995, where I find that if the S&P 500 futures remains unsuccessful in sustaining above the levels of 3089, we can see one more exhaustive move in the S&P 500 futures, where I find that the S&P 500 futures may see a strong support above this uptrend line, which is currently at the levels of 2874. Here I find that this zone is a decisive zone, because here you can see that amid this yellow zone, whenever the S&P 500 futures entered amid this yellow zone, in a weekly time frame, we can see the S&P 500 futures found good support from the buyers. So once again the S&P 500 futures entered in this zone and found a good support here, and once again we have seen a good reversal from these levels. But I find that the S&P 500 futures have to sustain above the levels of 3996 to maintain this uptrend. Otherwise, I find that once again the S&P 500 futures may try to enter in this zone up to the levels of 2828, where the S&P 500 futures found good support whenever the S&P 500 futures found some selling pressure. So here let us have a look at the movements of S&P 500 futures in a daily time frame. So here you can see the movement of S&P 500 futures in a daily time frame. Here you can see that the S&P 500 futures started to move downward after facing stiff resistance at the levels of 3393, where the S&P 500 futures continued to break this stiff resistance. Finally, the S&P 500 futures started to move downward from February 20th, 2020. Here you can see that this downward move continued till February 28th, 2020, when the S&P 500 futures tested the lows of 2852, and from these levels S&P 500 futures found a sharp pullback on February 28th and finally closed at the levels of 2951. But on the upper side, the S&P 500 futures found stiff resistance at the levels of 2995. Here you can see that the S&P 500 futures showed a good bounce on March 2nd, 2020 and still maintaining this bounce. But here I find that in a daily time frame, the S&P 500 futures once again showing signs of exhaustion. Here you can see that the S&P 500 futures have entered in a tough resistive zone at the levels of 3110, and once again the S&P 500 futures have been facing this resistance on March 3rd, 2020. Here you can see that despite a strong opening on March 3rd, the S&P 500 futures have been showing some selling pressure. Friends, this is a live chart. Here you can see that an exhaustive candle has been formed, where I find that this may result in a sharp downward move up to the levels of 2992, where the S&P 500 futures may find some strong support at these levels. Now let us check this move in an hourly chart. So here you can see that in an hourly time frame, the S&P 500 futures have been showing stiff resistance at the levels of 3094, where we can see that above this level there is a thick presence of bears, where we may see an advent of a selling spree, which may result in a sharp downward move, where the S&P 500 futures have to defend this immediate support at the levels of 2995, where I find if the S&P 500 futures successfully defend this support, then only we can see the continuation of an uptrend in the S&P 500 futures. Otherwise, S&P 500 futures may find second support at the levels of 2936, but in case of an upward move, I find that the levels of 3106 will provide stiff resistance to S&P 500 futures. So thank you friends, thanks for watching this video. If you like this video, don't forget to share this video with your more and more friends. Thank you.